Hey everyone! So for the last 7 years, I've been marking tons of assignments, essays, and stuff like that at universities. And consistently, I think there are a few tips and tricks that people can use to improve the quality of their essay writing, especially when they're in their first year at university. So in the next couple of videos, I want to introduce you to a few of those tips to help improve your essay writing. And in this one, I'm going to talk about the top 5 things that I think are really easy to fix on the way through editing an assignment that you should focus on going into your next essay. The first one is not to use big words where you can use a smaller word. And that might be things like utilize as opposed to the word use, but also using just big, complicated language when you're writing an essay. I think a lot of the time, because academic writing, journal articles, and textbooks can seem like it's written in a really dense, difficult to read language. And for that reason, it's kind of understandable that people think that we need to lift the register of the way we're writing into this really complicated language. But actually, it doesn't help your clarity of writing. The important thing with an essay is to get your ideas across, get your argument across in as clear language as you can. So it's really important to use simple words where you can. George Orwell used to say, never use a big word where a smaller word will do, and I think that applies to your essay writing as well. The next thing you need to do is avoid overpunctuating your writing. This sounds really complicated, but it's pretty simple. I think a lot of the time we first discover things like semicolons or colons or em dashes, and then just go crazy using them throughout sentences. And sometimes this can lead to really large, unwieldy, difficult to read sentences, or sentences that will run for like a whole paragraph, even half a page. One way to address that is to take a paragraph of text that you've written and then reimagine how you might write it with only full stops. Now, the risk obviously with doing that is sometimes the writing can seem a little bit choppy, like you're changing sentences too quickly. But as a way of practicing, when you're first writing essays at university, it helps to just write a whole paragraph and say, I'm only going to allow myself to use full stops. Then when you become more confident with that, you can add commas to sort of give some breathing room to ideas and thoughts, and then broaden that out to things like em dashes and colons. My pet peeve is using brackets in text. If you're going to bracket an idea, it probably doesn't need to be in the text at all. Or if it's that important that you want to include it, you don't need to put it in brackets. There's a couple of examples here for you. This paragraph only uses full stops, and you can use sentence length to create a sense of rhythm so that you're actually varying and making the text more interesting. But sometimes it can feel a little bit choppy if you're only using full stops. When you become more comfortable, start experimenting with commas. The comma allows me to create a brief pause, as if for thought, in my sentence flow. The next thing that students hear quite regularly from learning centres and academic writing support workshops at university is to get your reporting verbs right. If you Google reporting verbs online, you'll find a whole bunch of resources that give you lists of these verbs that we use to describe academic research. So the kinds of reporting verbs that we use in different disciplines can vary. If we're talking about art or English, we might talk about depictions, representations of ideas. When we're talking in general about research, which you'll be writing about in academic essays at university, we'll be using words like argues or suggests. So I've got an example here for you. Anxiety is depicted by the author to be a result of the level of choice and responsibility consumers feel in their consumption. So what you notice here is it says anxiety is depicted. It's not strictly incorrect, but stylistically it reads a little bit strangely. Like, depicted implies that it's kind of been pictured or painted by the author of this particular paper. So to correct this, I might use argued. Anxiety is argued by the author to be a result of the level of choice and responsibility consumers feel in their consumption. Reporting verbs help you to establish that someone is writing an academic paper on a topic, that they're putting forward an argument or a series of ideas that are supported by evidence from research. So it's really important that we use correct reporting verbs when you're writing things in essays at university. And one of the things you would have noticed in that example was the phrase the author. And I think it's really, really important that you practice using the author's name rather than the author when you're writing an essay. The same goes for using the article. Articles don't have ideas, but the authors who write the articles do. So it's a good idea to use the author's name. If I was going to substitute it in for that example we've got there, anxiety is argued by the author to be a result of the level of choice and responsibility consumers feel. And then we read this as anxiety is argued by Ward to be a result of the level of choice and responsibility consumers feel in their consumption. Straight away, it makes it easier for us to follow your text, especially if you're writing about a number of different sources. When you're using the author, your reader or marker won't be able to tell which author you're talking about. Whereas if you use their names, Ward, Ball, your marker will be able to follow Ward's argument here, Ball's argument there. Lastly, try to use active voice rather than passive voice when you're writing essays. The example that I gave you there is a really good instance of the passive voice. This is where in English we don't put the subject of a sentence first. So basic English sentence structure is subject, verb, object. And subject is the person doing something, the verb is the thing that they're doing, and the object is the thing they're doing it to. So in the example we've got here, anxiety is argued by Ward to be a result of the level of choice and responsibility consumers feel in their consumption. You can see here that the subject of this particular sentence is Ward, the author, because he's doing something, the verb, arguing, about anxiety. So to correct this sentence, we'd say Ward argues that anxiety comes from the level of choice and responsibility consumers feel about consumption. So you see there that sentence has been completely cleaned up and much easier for your marker to understand. That's just an example of how you can do editing on one sentence and go through sentence by sentence. If I could give you one final sixth tip, it would be to get a first draft of any of your assignments done much earlier than they're due so that you have time to do this kind of editing. So those top 5 tips again. Number 1, don't use big words where a smaller word will do. Number 2, don't overpunctuate. Keep it simple, full stops and commas at the most. Number 3, get reporting verbs straight, using reporting verbs like argues or suggests where you need to in an academic essay rather than things that depict or represent or something like that. Use the author's name rather than the author or the article. And lastly, try to use the active voice wherever you can. It will make your text more engaging and exciting to read. So that's it for this video. There'll be more to follow in time with little tips and tricks to writing your essays at university, and good luck.